Thank you, everybody, for coming. You could clap. There's like, that impulse. I feel like clapping whenever I'm in front of Mike Diaz. But in my couple of sentences of introduction and setting up why I think Mike's work is important, I will tell you without conditions or irony that I firmly believe that he is a genius. And a lot of that terminology is tossed around about people in the past whose work we revere, people that are of another time or are dead. It's sort of easy to sort of fall into the belief that David Hicks or Mongiardino or Sister Parrish and so forth were geniuses, and they were. But a lot of stuff crosses my desk that's contemporary and is supposed to be talked up and highly thought of, and I just am used to being underimpressed by that. And the minute I saw Mike Diaz's work, I couldn't believe that it was of our time, because it was so richly something that represented a lost era, which is the Baroque mostly. And you can take that to mean the 17th century Baroque of Naples and Turin and Rome, or you could take that to mean the 1930s Baroque of movie houses and Dorothy Draper and the sort of second coming of it as a form of modernism of that time. But what it also did that is to, takes two directions at once to make you a genius, was it also foretold a future of the Baroque that had never happened yet. We've had the Baroque as it originally was, we've had the Baroque as the 30s interpreted it, but whatever this was some kind of imagined set design for a future that hadn't occurred yet and was completely convincing. So I think he's one of the great intersections of decorative arts and furniture of our time, of those two voices and talents. And I think as we go through these slides, which are very rich and densely composed, because Mike is a great talker about his own work, you'll start to fall into line with this opinion that I have, that he's pretty much in a class by himself. When we talked about how to set up this talk, you said something very interesting, which was, people always ask, what happened to the Baroque?
You and I spoke about this actually 3 years ago. To add on to what you just said, my work is only as good as who uses it.
Well, it comes to life in the alchemy of composition, in someone else's hands.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do. My stuff is made entirely in order to be used in a composition. I don't do practical things. They're intended to be fantasy-oriented. They're intended to have thorns in a mirror so that you are scared to get near it. When you're looking down, they say it has to have the scalping. And but these are all Baroque aesthetics. So I didn't come up with this idea. This was actually Robert Venturi. He started talking, he was very, very into Roman things. But he said that Palladio made his way to North America because of all the English people that went on the Grand Tour. And they picked up Palladianism, and they exported it eventually to North America. And they were appalled when they saw Bernini and they saw Borromini, because this was all, they called it it was dance hall, and it was grotesque, and it was full of superstition, and it was very, very Catholic. But Borromini made his way to South America.
That's the second half of what I was setting you up to say, which was
because
the Baroque went to South America when the Neoclassicism went to North America.
The guy you like was Guarino Guarini. Guarino Guarini went to Lisbon. He did a whole project for urban design in Lisbon, right?
Well, don't embarrass me in front of my friends.
Okay.
Yeah, I know all about it. I mean, I was going to talk about that, actually.
Okay, so then Guarino Guarini, because of all this, this very, very Catholic kind of Baroque. Okay. So
I'm going to give us some images
I gotta get out of that because
to keep us on track.
Really, really into it. Okay. So what we're looking at here, this is San Carlino alle Quattro Fontane. It's on the Quirinal Hill of Rome. It's my favorite building. I just passed by an apartment building on 5th and 71st, which they had copied windows from this, and it blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, I go back to this. This is San Carlino alle Quattro Fontane. This is a masterpiece of the Roman Baroque. And I mean, it's just undulating. It's how did these columns get up here? What is this thing? I mean, nothing. It's just unbelievable. And it was the most outrageous architectural statement of its time.
So the building, just to jump in with some context, is by Francesco Borromini,
Yeah.
the architect that you're talking a lot about.
Yeah, it was a great
And alla quattro fontana refers to the four corners
four
of that
fountains.
intersection. I don't have a laser that works on the monitor, but
Yeah.
you see that arch at the base. It's one of the four fountains.
Yeah.
And so the building had to be notched and chamfered and therefore in a regular shape at the edge on a trapezoidal site to begin
Yes.
with to accommodate that fountain. And Borromini devised this undulating facade with the super Mannerist giant escutcheon, the cartouche at the top. This is the interior of it, the upper slide.
Yeah.
And then the left two slides, I guess, show what happened to the Baroque
Okay,
when
yeah,
it went
this
to
is where it
South
ended up.
America.
This is a
right?
conversation that you and I had like 3 years ago. You said, whatever happened
Yeah.
to the Baroque? I said, it still exists. But there's a very, very derivative style. And when you look at this and you look at this stuff
Yeah.
here, like, I mean, you start to realize that like, this is the descendant of that.
Yes. Is that a residential building?
It's residential.
It's
is
not
what
a
it is.
casino. It's not.
No, but this is what happened, is that these people that live in Bolivia, you know, because they've been isolated from like the rest of the world, the aspiration for them is that they want to live in a casino, or they want to live in a dance hall.
Because
or
they view that as an image of prosperity?
they view it as an image of prosperity, and also they're used to looking at churches. So when you look at this, you look at that, that's like why this is the obvious descendant of this, and this is the descendant of that. And it ended up over there. And that's like what, like, this is the descendants of Borromini. It's all fantasy, and it's, you know, it's all like, you know, everything's readable. It's like, there's like 3 rows. There's like a center, and then there's like the flanking left and right.
I
kind of thing.
totally dig your point. And when
then
you see
look
it,
at this,
you
and
can't
also,
unsee it.
When you're looking at something as Baroque, as an interior of Baroque, it's when like the church, they abandoned the idea of the basilica in the interior. And here, like you can see, like this is like, you know, descendant of the Baroque with like, you know, these honeycomb things, like you're like in a beehive, and these things that they look like, I mean, who knows what they like rims from tires from a car. A lot of what I do is informed by the Mexican Baroque.
To tee up this slide, those are Mike's mirrors at lower right,
Yeah.
and the rest of the imagery is the Mexican Baroque.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
This sequence has one thing by him as a sort of jumping off point.
Yeah,
for
I mean, what
the
happened
collage.
was like when the Spanish came in and they had to convert the indigenous people, like they had to blow their minds, right? And you know, they had all these pyramids and stuff to compete with, and they just decided they're going to level everything, and they were going to like, you know, re-urbanize everything. And when they re-urbanized everything, the Spanish crown, like and all the orders, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, and the Jesuits and all, they went crazy trying to impress everybody, and you know, so they would be obligated to convert into Christianity.
Impress, by everybody you mean the indigenous
The
people.
indigenous people, and it worked. It worked. Unfortunately, a lot of Mexico right now, like there's a litmus test, and like they don't want like. They see this all as bad right now because it represents colonialism and whatnot, and you know, the oppression. They consider it all very, very oppressive right now, and it really isn't, because I mean we are a mixed race, and this is just part of it, and it's really beautiful.
Tell me how you make a pair of mirrors like that from end to end. It starts as a sketch. You're very handy with a pencil. I've been through the design process with you, and there are lots of sketches.
Okay, what goes on with me is like.
Are these movie star false eyelashes or Baroque Jesus the crown of thorns?
Actually, yeah, not actually. The wound of Christ is where I got this. Like, there are like some images of Christ where he has like a big gaping hole, and there's like the rays coming out. And I did one, and then I thought, well, you know what? They look better if you do 2, because it kind of looks like their eyes, or they kind of look like their wings.
But the shape of that is derived from the Christ's wound to his chest?
Yeah, it's a stylized version of it. That's how that actually.
See how I knew I'd get an interesting answer?
I mean, they're mystical objects, and that's what I'm interested in creating. I like to make like the mystical object, because nobody seems to do that anymore. I mean, so somebody's got to do it.
So these titles are by you and very thoughtfully composed. If there's anything you want to say to read them, or you know, how to interpret them as they flash up, say it. But I think they're sort of self-explanatory.
Okay. This is These are Mexican decorative arts, the Baroque and Rococo period.
The chair upper right is Mexican.
That's Mexican. It's not Portuguese. Everybody thinks a lot of these are Portuguese. They're actually Mexican. And Mexico had a fascination with Chippendale's books and Queen Anne style of furniture. Except the indigenous people, they were looking at this through printed material, through books. They didn't know how to read numbers, and they didn't know how to read what he was writing about. So they improvised a lot. And they would come up with these kinds of things, and they would fill in, maybe it would look more interesting if I added this.
So I'm always taken back to my art history graduate years when I listen to Mike. You're saying that Chippendale's Director, which was the pattern book that he made, made its way to South America and was used to design the chair at upper right.
Yeah.
But they couldn't read the numbers, so they couldn't make the scale exact, and that's how it veers off into what looks to be Portuguese mannerism.
And then you have these kinds of pieces here. These are where we make our furniture out of, which is Michoacan. These three tables here, actually these two that are here, that is from the state of Guerrero. But these two that are here, they are Pátzcuaro furniture in which they were copying. They thought they were copying Chippendale's forms, right? And then they had also seen things coming in from Asia, lacquerware, those those folding screens that came out of Japan. And they thought they would paint these kinds of things like this in order to mimic this chinoiserie style. They also saw Ming Dynasty porcelain. So in Puebla, they started making Spanish mayolica, which is called talavera, but they were trying to copy Ming Dynasty porcelain.
What is the upper left, the horseman?
Okay, I forget who did this. This was the Count of Galvez, and this is from the 1740s, like 1745, 1747, I think.
But I mean, the black is what, and the white is
okay, this is just complete
in
Mexican fantasy. That it was just a portrait that he had, and it's fascinating because it's actually here in New York. This work is, I think, in the Hispanic Institute on the Upper West Side. It's small. But it was just somebody painted his portrait, and then they hired like a calligrapher just to fill in the blanks. It's like Salvador Dali. I mean, this is just, it's unbelievable. It's just how, it's just fantastic. It's like everything I really, really like. It's just like, it's opulent, and it's fantasy and
a term that came up when we talk about you, and I can't remember if I used it talking to you, is that it's punk rock. There's something, a thread of that through all of your work, even when it's the most.
Baroque. Well, that's what Derek Jarman always said, that Baroque was punk rock.
And what you're showing us, even though it's 300 years old, also feels like that.
He was always saying that was the ultimate.
It's anti-hierarchy. It's anti-bourgeois.
Yeah, like it's either high or low.
It's not a court.
I don't like anything bourgeois.
Created piece of furniture, following rules and signifying opulence.
Anything that's piss elegant or bourgeois, I'm like against.
It's full of mischief, like your work. Okay, what are we looking at here?
What are we looking at? Well, this is, Mexico. In terms of it, like this is another period I really, really like. There's a painter that I mean, he illustrated a lot of the national myth of Mexico, the beginning of the 20th century, by the name of Saturnino Herrán. He did that portrait down there.
So he looks sort of to me like the N.C. Wyeth of Mexico, judging by the upper mural.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought of him that way, but you're kind of right.
It's a Gestalt style of the time. I mean,
exactly.
Sargent painted murals like that too.
He was influenced a lot about that. There's a lot of the influence of what was going on in Austria, Milan, of that period, and a lot of what was going on in the United States here as well. And he died very, very young. And it's interesting because his competitor, a guy by the name of Diego Rivera, wound up becoming the most important muralist in Mexico. And there's a debate whether this guy would have lived longer. He probably would have taken that position away from Diego Rivera. And we wouldn't be talking about Diego Rivera or Frida Kahlo, which would have probably been better.
We talk about relentlessly. No, we could use a break.
Yeah, I mean,
we're talk about this guy.
Really do a break.
What's his name?
Saturnino Herrán, but he died young.
Maybe that was the problem. Nobody could pronounce.
Then there's another guy here. This guy who paints these volcanoes, who was also, he thought he was a mystic. His name was Dr. Otto. And he was fascinated with mysticism and during the 1920s, and he was involved with reintroducing a lot of the arts and crafts back into Mexico in the 1920s. There was a movement in which they used the public education system to promote culture and to develop like a cohesive identity in Mexico. He was also the only member of the Nazi Party in Mexico, and he was nuts. He was prone to prostitutes, and he got syphilis, and went to his brain, and he thought he was Adolf Hitler, and he was out of his mind. And
okay,
yeah,
well, moving on.
No, okay.
He should have gone
and
to
then there's
Paraguay,
There's
and
this
then
guy
he
that
wouldn't
I
have been
really,
alone.
really like. This is my favorite architect of Mexico, a guy by the name of Juan O'Gorman.
We're talking bottom left, the sort of
Juan
Aztec
O'Gorman.
style in.
Okay, you saw Juan
inlay.
O'Gorman when you were in Mexico City. You saw that red house that he built for his father.
Okay.
That's right next door to the Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes.
The house that he made for himself was this thing. He was a rationalist, Bauhaus architect, and he did a lot of projects that were very, very rationalist. And around 1946, I think it was 1946 or 1956, he said he was through with being rationalist, and he wanted, because he was also a painter and a muralist, and he said he wanted his architecture to compete with his muralist and his painting skills, and he went completely into just making things that were just very, very artistic. Unfortunately, that house doesn't exist, but his work, I mean, if you go to Mexico City, you should really, really check out as many things that he did. Many are in really, really bad shape. There's a university where there's a lot of work that he did, the UNAM. And
So are we looking at a garden or a rooftop or what?
No, that was just like, yeah, there was like a garden. That was like a space, because you like went from one room, which was a cave, and it went to another structure that was like, their sleeping quarters, I think.
Very cool.
No, it's really, really cool. He was...
Now,
Okay.
here's my favorite slide, because when I asked you about Baroque and how we're going to talk about it,
yeah.
the first thing you sent me was a low rider.
Okay, because that's what you and I were talking about 3
well-
years ago. You said, where did the Baroque go? I said, you need to go to East LA.
I was already there.
Baroque architecture, design and aesthetics, the derivative, like as time passed by, it ended up in these things. It ended up in, Chicano tattoo culture and lowrider magazines. I mean, you look at this, and the way they treated these things, it's like, it's where the Baroque ended up, like people are not building buildings anymore, but the aesthetics land now exist on, graffiti, lowriders. Yeah. The other place where it manifests itself, I mean, Western wear. These are all things that come from 16th century military aesthetics. One guy that really, really knew this is the guy who has a shop over here. His name's Ralph Lauren, right? Uh-huh. And Ralph Lauren, yeah. This was bad because he did a collection where he was influenced by, I guess he was collecting Saltillo Sarapes, and he did some great things with them. And the Mexican government, with their litmus test and all this, they got really, really mad at him that, how dare you culturally appropriate us and whatnot. And I thought it was great because he was actually celebrating it, and he did a great job. And they were stupid because they don't realize that this is a cultural appropriation as well, because the Mexicans didn't invent this. These things came from carpet designs that came from Turkey and from the Middle East that were winding up in Mexico. And that's where they got the ideas.
Do you want to hear the most interesting fragment that I could tell you about that sort of progress through continents of military uniform, literally fragments of military uniforms? The reason that red is the color of Russia is because Kiev was the center of textile production in the 19th century in Russia. And out of the conflict in Afghanistan between the English redcoat soldiers and the Russian soldiers came tattered fragments of military coats making their way along the Silk Road back to Kiev, where they were appropriated for use as carpets and stuff like that. So that red took on its Russian identity as a result of being taken from discarded military uniforms of England.
Wow. I never knew that.
I didn't either. I mean, I heard it once. I've never heard it again. I don't know how to verify it, but it makes I mean, I don't know why that wouldn't be true if someone told me that. I heard of that in the basement of a church in London at a freaky lecture about textiles by weirdos. And they knew things that nobody knew, so I think it could be true. Natalie Farmon, who's also a genius, not to throw that name around too liberally tonight, was with me when I heard it, and she forgot that anybody said that.
Well, she is a genius.
She is a genius. She's right over there. You can tell her yourself.
So,
keeping the pace, don't get a big head. The piece by you, the table at lower right, and the chaise, which I love.
The chaise.
Say something about your work in each slide, since we've taken the trouble to include
if you see like at the back of that car, that lowrider, like everybody thinks, oh, you were trying to do like some kind of like riff on like
Chrysler Building Angels or something.
Yeah, or like Thomas Hope or something. And I'm like, no, that's actually the back of a lowrider.
Okay, so it's a tail fin. Love
it's a tail fin of a lowrider.
I always
and then
learn
like
something.
The other thing here too, like also in Mexico, they were really somebody told me that there's a lot of Art Deco in Mexico City, and he says, there's a lot of these things that look like this. And he said they were impressed with radios. So they made the doors look like radios. So when I did this table up here, I tried to make it look like a radio speaker. And when I did this armoire down here, I tried to make it look as much like a radio as possible.
Oh my God, okay.
Because in Mexico, they were fascinated with radios. Like, these people.
Now that you say that, you've succeeded. I wouldn't have known to see the radio until you told me.
Well, yeah, that's why
it makes
it
complete sense.
It's a speaker.
Yeah.
Then this down here is like, this is this table here.
You know what your favorite building in New York must be? The GE building next to the Waldorf Astoria.
I like what's the Walker.
Lightning bolts at the top.
I watch a lot of film.
We're going to need your help here.
Yeah. I watch a lot of film. This is all Mexican stuff. It's kind of weird because of the kind of political environment we're living in, where there's like this obvious kind of Mexiphobia going on.
Well, not so much in New York.
No, but what I'm saying is that like, well, there's kind of like a subconscious kind of a thing that goes on with Mexico, and it's like, I think we've always kind of like here in the U.S. is like Mexico is kind of like the yin to the U.S. is kind of yang, because like it's like Palladio went up there. Why did Palladio go over there? Because people are more logical. They're driven to aspiration, whereas people in the South, they have urges and they're seen somehow more primitive. Not in a bad way,
and more
but
sensual.
That's like their thinking comes from their gut instead of from their mind. Whenever you look at there's some great films here.
Tell us what these films are.
The Night of the Iguana. And
that's Richard Burton.
Richard Burton, Ava Gardner. This is Jodorowsky. I don't know if you've ever seen anything by him.
No.
But anyway, Santa Sangre. Well, anyway, these three films, they have to do with, except for Finney up there under the volcano.
Okay.
But anyway, it's about somebody who comes from like this Protestant kind of background that somehow ends up in Mexico and is confronted with like his primitive desires being sexual. Burton was like chasing three girls at the same time in Night of the Iguana. Finney is having problems with his wife who's left him because he's living a very, very debauched life. And it's about like the affairs that he has the last day of his life, and he winds up being killed by some Mexican cops. This one by Santa Sangre by Alejandro Jodorowsky is about, there's a kid here, and he's like half gringo, half Mexican, and his father just goes around womanizing and insane. It's kind of hallucinate. It's like a hallucination.
And why these two paintings are with us in this tile?
Cristobal de Villalpando. They consider him the John Paul Rubens of Mexico, of Latin America. He's not Rubens. I don't know why they call him.
I consider him the Hieronymus Bosch as much as Rubens.
But anyway, he painted these things for churches all over Mexico. They were Baroque, and they were so fantastic. I mean, this virgin that's coming out, like, he's praying to this tree, and she's coming out of this tree. And then there's this thing of like, Noah's Ark here and like the flood and everything, and it's just outrageous. They were thinking that when he was painting, he was actually on peyote.
Uh-huh.
And he was hallucinating the whole time. And when he's my favorite painter in Latin America. It's completely outrageous, the things that he did.
Very mystical and very macabre.
Yeah. There was a time, like, everybody was in the 60s, everybody was going to Mexico, and the Doors, Jim Morrison, like all these people like from Laurel Canyon, so they were all going over there and they were doing drugs and they were making music down there. And you can see this like in cover art on records like Santana and all that. and it's just it's the same thing as this. It's
So
what it ended up.
before we get to the things that you and I have done together, which I have a few images of, tell us about your talisman, lower left.
I did it for a friend, and actually his sister's here. And he's like the only person I know who's crazy enough to ask me to do something
Right.
crazy.
It's the most useless thing that you
It's
made.
yeah, because
it's not
he
a
said,
table, it's not a
he
mirror.
told me,
it's
because
not,
he asked me, he said, I want you to make me a mirror for my from my powder room that nobody can ever use. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to make it that it's too big for the space, and that like there's going to be like this aperture here that if you want to powder your nut, it's like impossible, right?
right.
And
It's like a black opal.
no, but
the lens.
we
if
actually
it's even glass.
put a mirror in his.
Okay.
Yeah, he's great. I like working
Well,
with
as
him.
Bill Blass would have said, it's chic as hell.
It's chic.
And the only
I don't see it very chic.
It's chic. It's chic. The only powder room that brings to mind that could rival that in terms of the mission being impracticality but style was a room I went into once by Mangiardino in a house here on 70th Street. And there was no mirror at all by intent, by perverse intent. The entire walls were covered with Greek plates and no mirror.
That
So
sounds great.
somebody was thinking exactly
The
way
other thing is
you
that
and
it
your
actually
client
looks
were.
like a camera's watching you. So if you're in the
Yeah,
no,
it does.
it's like
That's
God's
you
writing
always
on it.
having a toe in the future. All right, so I'm just gonna riff a little bit because we're near the end, and one of the things that Kate wanted us to try to do was talk about how to use your furniture. So besides all the incredible source material and bizarre theory and history that there's no other way to learn except by listening to you that we've just looked at, I'm going to show you how I, as a person that goes to work every day with a briefcase and tries to, I'm like a dentist. I'm there to perform a task and decorate these rooms. How I harness your lightning and turn that into useful and very cherished elements in not freaky decoration at all. So one of those custom jobs was when I sent Mike a picture of a grotto chair, which is like a form that originated probably in the 16th or 17th century and then was popularized in the 18th and 19th centuries. They always look like this. They're always gilded. They're always kind of cartoon furniture. There's a sweetness about them. And I wanted to Mike Diazify this and make it a little bit scary and more muscular. So I left that with him. And I needed this thing to be a sculpture, not a sweet chair with, in a Rubens painting. And he took all of the elements, like the dolphin arms and the things that were familiar, and he gave it the spikes and the thorns and the Diaz Baroque edge that I wanted that chair to have. And the end result, in this naked sort of shaker environment of the stair hall, I knew I needed one piece that really had power in, because everything else was going to be plain and white, was a total success. And now it's something you've made more of.
I made variations. I've never made the same exact
Well,
thing.
my favorite was the one you made with me, and I think it's an example of how wonderful it is to work with you because you don't even need to do shop drawings or sort of spitball the idea. You took the brief and you made exactly what I hoped you would make, which would be impossible for me to describe. So it's fortunate that you did. Here is Mike's extremely literate in the history of furniture and decorative arts, and he knows this amazing cabinet maker from the 18th century called Pierre Langlois, the Englishman, Langlois. Pierre Langlois was a French cabinet maker living in London in the 1750s, 60s, and so his furniture, because it's got a foot in two worlds, doesn't really look French. It looks stranger than French, and before there was scholarship, people used to look at things like this and think it was German, or just some in-between culture like Austria. But this is a French cabinet maker working in England. So there's rosewood, which is English, and these big volutes. It's like got a Christopher Wren vibe to it as well. And this is one of my favorite things because it's so strange and it's impossible to categorize, and it has no descendants. And I showed it to Mike, and I said, there are two of these cabinets. There's 6 in the world. There's 2 of them in Windsor Castle. They were cherished by Albert, Victoria's husband, probably because he was German and liked their guts. And I want you to give me the Mexican Baroque found, salvage timbers rustic version of this. And I started to see pictures out of his workshop with the leather top, like Frankenstein's stitched together skull and the surprise Baroque orange of the drawers that, none of this I asked for. I just said, give me your version of this.
That's why we like working with you. You just tell us to do it, and then you just accept it.
The only thing you did was, because who can, Diaz is not done by committee. It's not a la carte. You take the vision.
My guys, they're
and
always
you're
saying
grateful.
like they love working for you. They're like, oh, he's the only one that doesn't give us any problems.
Now, what I never told you was the trouble we had getting this into the building because it's so massive that the elevator was. I think somebody had to take the volutes off or something. I didn't want to know, but this is a battleship. And getting it in the building was no joke, but it did eventually get in. And it's one of the sort of vignettes that I'm most proud of in an apartment that is completely curated. Every single thing in here is the best of a certain point of view. This is Pierre Jovanovich's modern asymmetrical chair. This is a great 18th century campaign table that I was invoking sort of Bill Blass's love of a small dining room by using their François Cautroux's own chrome nuage tables, Leger and you.
Yeah.
And I could have put anything there. There was any yes I wanted, I was going to get from this client. But the anchor piece of furniture, the cabinetry that really sold the fact that the room was about the future, I knew had to come from you. But I didn't want it to be palatial. So that's why we needed you. And your 300-year-old wood. Where do you get that wood? What was it before?
Okay, I have people that they source me. There are a lot of projects going on where they're restoring old buildings in Mexico, and being that they used beams, the beams rot. So they call me up and they say, look, we can give you a truckload of X amount of 300, 400-year-old beams. Actually, the 4 volutes that are the legs of that piece, they're probably 400 years old. And they were the best chunks of that kind of pine that I had. And I saw that and I said, those were the only 4 pieces, that was the only beam that I had that I could get that kind of form with that heft. That was a really, really special piece for us. And
for me.
The other thing was that I know you're really into automotive design. And you're really into boats. So I tried to make this look like a shipbuilder made it. And I also have that presence of like, let's say like, some Bugatti from like the 30s or something. Like, I mean, just like, it's massive, it's huge, it's voluptuous.
Yes.
It has to, it had to look like that. It had to be sexy like that.
You succeeded.
Well, yeah.
Here is a Mike Diaz mirror. I brought this picture not because it's the best view of the mirror, but because I wanted to show you how polite decoration, this is not a house for people with bizarre taste at all. It's a beautiful house on the ocean in Southampton, full of pretty things. And when I showed these pictures to Stephen Sills, he said, oh, it's Butch, Sister Parish.
It's Bush.
And so I thought, yes, I did do that, didn't I? But when I wanted the Butch, I called you, and I got that mirror with those spikes to give it an edge that people probably don't even notice why they feel that there's something more than pretty going on in here when they're at dinner and it's candlelit and they're not paying attention, but it comes from the subliminal effect of your spikiness and the difficulty that you throw into a room which is 85% pretty that makes it great.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I want things to be difficult.
Yeah.
I think, like, especially, like, there's a lot of design right now. I don't want to be mean or anything, but it's like a lot of
you can be mean.
A lot of it is paint by number.
These people hear it all.
And it's just
Everybody
like,
in here?
it's just a bunch of people that they go on a shopping list and they like, there was this great quote, I was looking for it by this decorator named Harrison Cultra.
Yes, great
where
decorator.
he said like all these people, and it was like he was complaining about this in the 70s, where they like have the right chair and the right fabric and they have all these right things, and he says, and they put it all together, and it's the most boring and the stupidest thing you've ever seen in your life. Because he said you had to put something in there that contradicts it. And
well,
like that's what taste and style is.
Yeah.
Like somebody,
yeah.
You have to have something ugly, or you have to have something difficult.
One of my favorite quotes along those lines was this woman in Paris, very stylish, Sao Schlimberger, did her last house with a South African decorator who was extremely bizarre, called Gabon O'Keefe.
Yeah.
And it was the strangest thing. If she'd known to call you or you were grown up and in business yet, she would have. But Johnny Agnelli was asked what he thought of this apartment when it first came out. It was so sensational. He said, well, it's completely hideous, but totally fabulous. And that's sort of like, yeah, what impressed him the most, you know, that made it so sophisticated. So this is my last image, and we're going to end with this. Okay. And if anybody has any questions, we're delighted to address them. Thank you.
No, thank you, David.